For 30 years, Johnny Carson was more than just a host who worked late at night. He was the person America trusted to bring them close to the stars. Every night, millions of people watched as the biggest names from Hollywood came on his show to laugh, tell jokes, and share their stories on his couch. When the cameras were on, Carson made everything look easy, showing that warm smile and quick humor that made people watching feel like they were sitting right there with him. But what the people watching didn't know was that Carson was very different when the cameras stopped filming. When he wasn't on screen, he kept a private list in his mind, a secret list of famous people he thought were mean, controlling, or just really bad people behind their beautiful and glamorous appearances. To the public, these famous people seemed perfect. To Carson, they were terrible people hiding in front of everyone. Workers on the show often said Johnny had one easy test. How did a star treat the helpers, the camera workers, the people who couldn't help make their career better? If they were nice, he respected them, even if they were hard to work with as guests. But if they were mean to people who had no power, Carson never forgot it. Over the years, he quietly told close friends shocking stories about famous actors and actresses who people loved and admired, but who made him feel disgusted when the lights turned off. And while Carson rarely talked publicly about the people he didn't like, the people who worked with him knew exactly which names he would never forgive. Tonight, we're showing you that secret list. These are the 5 stars from the golden age of Hollywood who Johnny Carson reportedly hated the most. The guests who made his smile fake and who he believed showed the darkest parts of being famous in Hollywood. And we'll start with the one who shocked him more than anyone else.
Jerry Lewis has been entertaining audiences all over the world since he was a little teeny boy. And he's still a little teeny boy.
Jerry Lewis was one of the most well-known entertainers in America. He was a comedian, an actor, a director, and even someone who helped people through charity. His name was legendary in Hollywood. Millions of people loved his silly humor, his wild energy, and, of course, his famous yearly shows on TV that raised money for children's health. That's what the outside world saw. But Johnny Carson saw something very different when Lewis came on The Tonight Show. Behind the scenes, the man who said he cared so much about children and charity could be shockingly mean to the very people who worked to make him look good. According to many staff members, Lewis treated the workers with clear disrespect, yelling orders, refusing to learn anyone's name, and calling people, "Hey you," or "Camera guy." Even worse, Lewis didn't just save his nasty attitude for lower-level workers. He went after Carson himself. In one famous appearance, Lewis kept interrupting Johnny, taking over questions that were meant for other guests. At one point, he even reached over and fixed Carson's tie without asking permission. This clearly annoyed the host, who usually stayed calm. And here's the thing, everyone on staff knew one rule. You did not touch Johnny Carson unless he touched you first. Lewis knew that rule too. Some people who worked there believe he did it on purpose, just to show he was in control. But what really disgusted Carson was that Lewis was being fake. He would watch Lewis cry on national television during his charity shows, acting like he was a saint who loved children, and then see the complete opposite behavior when the cameras weren't filming. Staff members described him as insulting, dismissive, and downright mean to people who couldn't help his career. Carson reportedly told a coworker after one appearance, "He's what happens when someone's ego gets bigger than their talent." Finally, Carson had enough. After one really tense meeting in the early 1980s, he made the unusual decision to ban Lewis from The Tonight Show completely. That almost never happened. Carson put up with a lot of difficult guests because they brought good ratings, but Lewis crossed the line. Years later, in private talks, Carson didn't hide his feelings. In a town full of big egos and fake people, he said Jerry Lewis stood out as truly mean. And if that was Carson's opinion of a beloved charity worker, imagine how he felt about the next guest, a former child star whose behavior backstage made everyone on set feel uncomfortable.
My first guest, you all know, I have known Mickey Rooney for 20 minutes.
Mickey Rooney was once Hollywood's golden boy. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, he was the #1 most popular actor in America. He was the cheerful, energetic kid that audiences loved in classic movies like the Andy Hardy films. He was a living connection to the golden age. And by the time he came on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, his name still had the shine of Hollywood royalty. But behind the nostalgia, Rooney had built a reputation that made producers and staffs nervous the moment they saw his name on the schedule. To say it simply, Carson thought Rooney had never really become an adult. He might have been in his 50s and 60s during his Tonight Show visits, but his behavior was more like that of a reckless teenager. For one thing, Rooney was unpredictable with alcohol. Staff members said he showed up drunk more than once, slurring his words, stumbling through stories, and losing his thoughts in the middle of talking. In one famous appearance, he started telling a story about Judy Garland that went into such inappropriate territory that Carson had to suddenly stop him and change the subject while they were on live television. Afterward, Carson was heard asking his producer, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" Even more troubling was Rooney's behavior toward women on set. Several assistants dreaded being assigned to work with him because he had built a reputation for crossing boundaries. Former staff members recalled how he would hold a woman's hand too long when she brought him water, pull her closer while pretending to have a conversation, or make comments that left them clearly uncomfortable. By the 1970s, that kind of behavior was already wrong, and Carson, who wasn't exactly known as someone who fought for morals, was still embarrassed enough to apologize directly to women who had to deal with it. One director later said, "I've never seen Johnny so personally embarrassed by a guest's behavior." Carson eventually made changes. Rooney's appearances became less common, and when he was booked, filming was sometimes moved to earlier in the day to reduce the chance of late-night drinking. It was Johnny's way of reducing the chaos while still respecting Rooney's fame. But even with those safety measures, Rooney remained a problem. He represented something Carson hated, a star who thought his fame excused behavior that would never be allowed in a normal workplace. And if Rooney left Carson embarrassed, the next guest left him completely angry. Because when it came to Bette Davis, her words were sharper than a knife.
Pretty sensational monologue
Thank you.
tonight. Nobody ever mentioned your monologues.
Bette Davis was Hollywood royalty. With her unique voice, razor-sharp wit, and 2 Academy Awards, she was one of the greatest actresses of her time. By the time she appeared on The Tonight Show, Davis was already a legend, and audiences tuned in to hear her tell old Hollywood stories in that fiery, unforgettable style. On camera, she could be funny, charming, and captivating. But off camera, Carson found her absolutely exhausting. Crew members described her as confrontational, sharp-tongued, and impossible to please. She didn't just exchange witty jokes, she tore people down. When booked alongside other guests, especially younger performers or other women, Davis would interrupt, control the conversation, and even physically turn her back on them as if they didn't exist. One talent coordinator remembered, "If someone else was getting laughs, you could see her getting angry. She was already planning how to take the spotlight back." Worse, Davis sometimes went after the staff. She reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before filming, and when she had been drinking, her comments became even more brutal. Makeup artists and cue card holders remembered her using sexist or racist insults without hesitation. One makeup artist recalled Davis refusing to let her work, saying with contempt, "Find me someone whose hands don't shake like a drunk." For Johnny, who usually avoided confrontation at all costs, Bette Davis pushed him past his limit. During one rehearsal, she yelled at a cue card holder for being too slow. Carson stepped in quietly but firmly, telling her, "Miss Davis, on this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was reportedly stunned, not used to being challenged, and actually backed down. But the damage was done. Carson admired Davis's huge talent, but he also believed talent didn't give anyone the right to humiliate others. After her final appearance in the early 1980s, Carson told his producer, "That's the last time. Life's too short to be verbally attacked by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has." If Davis represented the razor-sharp cruelty of Hollywood's golden age, the next name on Carson's blacklist represented something even darker: raw intimidation. because when Frank Sinatra walked into a room, even Carson felt the tension.
Whose records do you put on?
Frank Sinatra was one of the most powerful entertainers of the 20th century. To the public, he was the smooth singer with the velvet voice, old blue eyes, the perfect symbol of class, charm, and cool. On The Tonight Show, he could tell jokes, tell stories, and leave the audience hanging on every word. But Carson saw something far more threatening beneath the charm. Behind the scenes, Sinatra brought an atmosphere of fear. He rarely arrived alone. Instead, he rolled into the studio with a group of up to 8 men, not fellow entertainers, but what staff quietly described as guys you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. They spread through the building, watching the crew, creating a feeling that the entire studio was being watched. One cameraman later said it was like being on set with the mob. You felt like if you looked at him the wrong way, something might happen. And then there were Sinatra's outbursts. During one filming in the early 70s, a floor manager gave Sinatra the standard 3 minutes warning before his segment. Normal procedure for every guest. Sinatra didn't take it well. According to multiple witnesses, he grabbed the man by his tie, pulled him close, and said quietly and angrily, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The manager, a Korean War veteran, was left shaken. Watching from his office monitor, Carson nearly canceled the segment. The only reason he didn't was because his producer reminded him of the ratings Sinatra would bring in. But Carson never forgot. He hated bullies, especially when they picked on people who couldn't fight back. His patience grew thinner when Sinatra began canceling appearances at the last minute, sometimes after already arriving at the building, deciding simply that he wasn't in the mood. The final straw came during a commercial break when Sinatra made a cruel comment about a female staff member's appearance loud enough for others to hear. For once, Carson broke his usual detached professionalism and snapped back, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." Those nearby said the tension in the room was electric. Sinatra wasn't used to being challenged. After that, Carson limited Sinatra's appearances to once a year at most. For a host who rarely interfered with bookings, it was a strong statement. Behind the smile, Johnny couldn't stand the way Sinatra used his power. Charm for the cameras, intimidation for everyone else. And yet, even Sinatra wasn't the one who disturbed Carson the most. That spot was reserved for a Hollywood legend whose icy charm melted the moment the cameras turned off. For Johnny, Joan Crawford was the true queen of cruelty.
Joan Crawford was the definition of old Hollywood glamour. Perfect hair, flawless posture, and that commanding presence. When she sat on Johnny Carson's couch in 1970, audiences saw nothing but grace. She represented what people thought a movie star should be. But Carson quickly learned that beneath the polished exterior, Crawford was a nightmare. Even before she arrived at the studio, her demands set the tone. She sent over a 4-page memo detailing everything from the exact angle of her chair to the studio temperature, which had to be exactly 67 degrees, not 66, not 68. She even brought her own makeup team, dismissing The Tonight Show's award-winning artists as if they weren't good enough for her. And once she was inside the building, the appearance of elegance cracked. Staff members recalled how Crawford treated people based entirely on their position. To Carson, she acted with sweetness and charm. But when a 20-year-old production assistant accidentally entered her dressing room with a tray of water, Crawford unleashed hell. Witnesses said she launched into an attack so vicious that people in the hallway froze. She called the young woman names, said nastily that she was brainless, and even suggested she find work in a brothel, where being incompetent might be an asset. The girl ran away in tears. Crawford demanded she be fired. Carson's producer refused, but the tension poisoned the entire filming. And what unsettled Carson most wasn't just the cruelty. It was the performance. Crawford could flip the switch instantly. During commercial breaks, she sat with a blank face, in silence, cold as marble. But the second the red light blinked on, she transformed into America's sweetheart, laughing, glowing, pretending every moment was natural. Carson tried to connect with her, but he later told Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Joan's daughter Christina published Mommy Dearest, exposing her alleged abuse at home, Carson wasn't surprised. According to friends, he just nodded and said, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." For Johnny Carson, Joan Crawford was the perfect example of Hollywood's darkest truth, that the people America worshipped as icons could be ice-cold tyrants once the cameras were gone. Johnny Carson spent 30 years smiling alongside Hollywood's biggest names, but he also saw what the rest of America never did. Behind the gowns, tuxedos, and polished charm were people who could be cruel, arrogant, and sometimes downright dangerous. For Carson, it didn't matter how many Oscars you had or how many records you sold. His test was simple. How did you treat the people who couldn't give you anything in return? The makeup artists, the assistants, the camera crew. If you were kind, Johnny respected you. But if you showed your darkest side to those without power, you earned a spot on his silent blacklist. That's why he could call Jerry Lewis truly hateful. That's why he felt embarrassed by Mickey Rooney, exhausted by Bette Davis, disgusted by Frank Sinatra's intimidation, and completely chilled by Joan Crawford's cruelty. These weren't just difficult guests. They were the faces of Hollywood's hidden rot. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The golden age of Hollywood looked glamorous on screen, but Carson's stories remind us that fame can hide just as much darkness as it reveals. The camera adds more than 10 pounds. It adds a layer of fiction. So the next time you see old footage of old Hollywood stars, ask yourself, who were they really when the lights went off? Because if these 5 legends could hide their cruelty behind fame, imagine how many others slipped through unseen. And if you thought this list was disturbing, wait until you hear what was happening behind the scenes of a beloved sitcom from the 1980s, where the cute child star reportedly left the crew so terrified that producers installed panic buttons on set. That story is coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed uncovering the darker side of Hollywood's golden age, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I'd love to hear what you think. Which of these stars shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.